Good morning. We'll call this committee to order. Thank you all for being with us. I'm starting today's conversation on the Defense Production Act by highlighting that this act is a vital tool for protecting the American people and securing the economic foundations of our national defense. The DPA was enacted during the early days of the Cold War to ensure that the United States could rapidly scale up domestic industrial capacity in times of national emergency. Over the past 70 years, it has stood the test of time, empowering presidents from both parties to respond to urgent security needs with decisive action. The world has changed dramatically since the DPA was first signed into law. Bless you. The threats we face today are more complex and often more economically driven than ever before. Threats from adversaries weaponizing supply chains to our dangerous over-reliance on foreign sources for critical minerals, pharmaceuticals, and defense components. The DPA gives us the authority to meet these challenges head-on. And as chairman of this committee, I believe ensuring the DPA remains a focused, reliable, and agile authority to support national security and true national emergency response is among our committee's highest priorities and responsibilities. The standing rules of the Senate provide this committee with jurisdiction over the defense production and economic stabilization. As we consider improvements to this act, we have an opportunity to ensure that the law continues to support American security and resilience in the years to come. That means keeping the DPA tightly tailored to the purposes for which it was created: defense production, emergency preparedness, and the protection of critical domestic supply chains. We must ensure that the DPA supports the defense industrial base, the backbone of our military strength. That includes investments in munitions manufacturing and advanced technologies that enable our warfighters to deter and defeat threats. It is also important to secure certain economic supply lines critical to our national interest. Whether that is from domestic mining and processing of rare earth elements to building out second source capabilities for antibiotics and essential pharmaceuticals, which are overwhelmingly sourced overseas today. The COVID-19 pandemic reminded us in stark terms that we cannot rely on foreign nations like China to outsource the production of life-saving medicine. The DPA has also helped Americans in moments of natural disaster and national emergency, including supporting disaster relief efforts and ramping up production of PPE during COVID. These are the kinds of uses that fall squarely within the Act's original mission. It is no coincidence that the America First agenda has prominently featured the DPA in its approach to national security and industrial independence. Notably, President Trump's executive order on critical minerals recognized that long-term security means reducing dependence on geopolitical rivals for resources we need to defend our homeland and grow our economy. Let me close by thanking our witnesses for being with us today and taking your time and providing your insights that are necessary. Your testimony will help inform this committee's work as we move toward a responsible reauthorization of the DPA. If we remain focused and principled, we can ensure the DPA continues to protect the American people, bolster our defense readiness, and secure our strategic supply chains for decades to come. Thank you. Ranking Member Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding today's hearing on the Defense Production Act. I appreciate our working together on this in a bipartisan way. For 75 years, the Defense Production Act has been the cornerstone of our efforts to build a more robust industrial base and advance our national defense. Congress passed the DPA in 1950, and President Truman rapidly deployed it to help our country mobilize for the Korean War. Throughout the Cold War, we used the DPA to mobilize the nation's industrial might. During the 1980s and 90s, we used the DPA to seed investments in key technologies like microelectronics and metal composites that enhanced our warfighting capabilities and our technological edge. When Hurricane Katrina devastated the Gulf Coast, we used the DPA to speed up the distribution of fuel to the disaster zone. During the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Trump administration used the DPA to fast-track production of defibrillators and masks and other medical equipment. When the People's Republic of China threatened to cut off our access to critical minerals, the Biden administration used the DPA to jumpstart critical mineral production in the United States. In the toolkit of economic and national security tools, the DPA is among the oldest, and it is absolutely essential to the challenges our country faces today and into the future. For decades, our nation offshored jobs and industries. We failed to invest in growing, dynamic, competitive markets in critical industries here at home. We let big corporations grow, crush competition, and pursue short-term profits, even when it meant depriving us of good-paying jobs, of undermining our technological edge, and eroding our industrial base. And the results speak for themselves. Today, we have more fragile supply chains and are more dependent on foreign countries than at any point in modern American history. Just take a few examples. In 1990, we made 37% of the world's chips. Today, we make only 12%. In 1986, we had U.S.-flagged ocean-going vessels. Today, we have 80. Because of offshoring by Big Pharma, 9 out of every 10 prescriptions filled in the United States was manufactured overseas. This leaves us dangerously vulnerable. It takes one major disruption, a fire at a factory halfway around the world, a war between two foreign countries, or a natural disaster abroad or at home to cause massive supply chain disruptions. In 2021, a drought in Taiwan and severe weather in Texas led to a global semiconductor shortage that shut down production lines across the United States. Experts estimated that this single disruption cost the United States economy $240 billion in 1 year alone. A similar disruption in the supply chain for life-saving drugs and antibiotics could be economically devastating and cost American lives. As we struggle, the People's Republic of China moves forward. China has used non-market policies and practices to capture crucial industries like semiconductors, batteries, and pharmaceuticals, industries that we once dominated. China is also using its leverage over critical supply chains to exert more influence internationally. In recent months, the Chinese government has implemented bans on export of critical minerals and rare earth magnets to the United States in response to President Trump's tariffs, and even told countries like South Korea that rely on Chinese inputs that they must stop exporting critical minerals and equipment to some U.S. companies. We don't need to accept this. We have the tools to reshore critical supply chains. We can deepen cooperation with our allies, and we can build resilience here at home. One tool to help us do that is the Defense Production Act, which we must reauthorize before it lapses in September. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your holding this hearing, and I am eager to work with you on these critical issues.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member, and we'll turn to our witnesses before us today. Our first witness will be Ms. Mackenzie Lyon, Vice President for External Affairs at Perpetua Resources. Ms. Lyon, you are now recognized for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman Scott, Ranking Member Warren, and members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Mackenzie Lyon. I'm an Idahoan, and I'm Vice President of External Affairs for Perpetua Resources. And I'm here today to share the story of the Stibnite Gold Project, which is located in the heart of central Idaho and is designed to return to and restore an abandoned mining site and responsibly produce gold and the critical mineral antimony. And I hope to share with you how the Defense Production Act has successfully saved America's only reserve of antimony. Over the past 2 decades, China has invested more than $57 billion in controlling critical mineral supply chains around the globe. And today, the majority of U.S. defense materials are reliant on Chinese minerals like antimony, gallium, germanium, and tungsten. China is wielding this dominance as leverage and has formally cut off all exports of antimony, gallium, germanium, and tungsten to the United States, wounding our defense readiness and American manufacturing capabilities. Yet, when the American defense industrial base turns to American miners to fill the gap, we are hobbled out of the starting gate with a 29-year average from identifying a mineral resource to getting it out of the ground. Put it simply, we are dangerously reliant and we are behind. And antimony is a great example. We have no domestically mined source of antimony. Today, China, Russia, and Tajikistan control 90% of the global supply. But it is critical to our energy, technology, and defense readiness. In addition to numerous commercial applications, the Department of Defense uses a specialized form, antimony trisulfide, as a key non-replaceable component as the primer in hundreds of munition types. But in 2021, China informally stopped shipping our sole source of military-grade antimony trisulfide to the United States. This is the context for our DPA award to revive the stibnite mining district. But the story is not new. On the eve of World War II, the Japanese blockade in the Pacific and invasion of China blocked the American supply of tungsten and antimony that we needed for the war effort. So through the U.S. Strategic Materials Program, a precursor to DPA, the government enabled the stibnite mine to supply both antimony and tungsten for the Allied war effort. The men and women of Stibnite, Idaho are credited with shortening World War II by a year, saving 1 million American lives. That's how important it is to access these minerals in our backyard. Today, Stibnite has one of the largest resources of antimony not controlled by the Chinese, but the site was left abandoned. In 2010, our company set out with a vision that we could redevelop stibnite for gold and antimony while providing comprehensive environmental restoration to this abandoned site. But in 2022, we were 12 years on and $300 million in and facing another permitting delay. As a single asset company entirely reliant on private investment, the market was exhausted by delay. We were almost out of funds and running out of options that wouldn't stall development. These are the moments that the Defense Production Act was created for. An open solicitation under DPA was our lifeline. China had just stopped shipping antimony trisulfide to American defense manufacturers, and thankfully the leaders of the Army's Picatinny Arsenal, the Industrial Base Policy Office, the Defense Logistics Agency, and the Air Force contracting team acted with urgency to bring us into the program. It has since invested $59 million. That $59 million kept our permitting process on track, and as of this week, we have earned all of our federal permits. It attracted an additional $54 million in private investment, giving hope to the market. And it put us on the precipice of a $2 billion investment in rural Idaho, meaning hundreds of jobs and more than $500 million in federal and state taxes. With all federal permits now in hand, we proudly consider ourselves a DPA success story. DPA's effectiveness is due in large part to its agility to meet industry where its needs are, whether to advance feasibility studies, expand processing and manufacturing capabilities, and provide offtake certainty. DPA needs to step in when the private market cannot. America's excellence is rooted in innovation, hard work, and competition. And DPA is a powerful tool to supercharge this excellence when we need it the most. It is the temporary scaffolding American businesses need to be resilient in hard times so that we can respond to our nation's needs. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, I'd like to thank you for your leadership on this issue, and I look forward to this discussion.
Thank you, Ms. Lyon. Next, we'll hear from Mr. Jared Brown, Executive Director of Global Shield. Mr. Brown, you have 5 minutes as well.
Thank you, and good morning, Chairman Scott, Ranking Member Warren, and distinguished members of the committee. I'm honored to testify you before today on the importance of the Defense Production Act to our national security and defense. My name is Jared Brown, and I am the co-founder and executive director of Global Shield. We are a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping the nation manage global catastrophic risk. Simply speaking, global catastrophic threats are the very worst crises our nation could face and range from nuclear war to global pandemics. They pose the risk of trillions of dollars in economic damage and millions of lives lost. These threats are so concerning that Congress passed the Global Catastrophic Risk Management Act into law in 2022 to help prepare the U.S. for these threats. The DPA is a core instrument of the nation's preparedness for and response to global catastrophic risk. As you are aware, the DPA's Title I authorities ensure that government is given priority access to products and services that are necessary in a time of crisis. DPA's Title III authorities help ensure that we have adequate supply of those products and services in a time of need. In the context for planning for and responding to catastrophes abroad and at home, I would like to make 3 key points about the future-ready DPA. First, it is not an exaggeration to say that dealing with any worst-case scenario that you can imagine depends, in part, on DPA authorities. Be it a major global military conflict, a pandemic killing millions of Americans, a terrorist use of a chemical or biological weapon in a U.S. city, or a catastrophic hurricane or earthquake. All of our plans include the use of authorities under this act. For every national security crisis that keeps policymakers up like you at night, the DPA is an indispensable tool for saving American lives. Therefore, we urge Congress to reauthorize and modernize these authorities this year. Second, even though our government agencies know how critical DPA authorities are in catastrophic scenarios, our plans for using the authorities are often based on unrealistic expectations about the private sector. Often, the government's planning says, in effect, if we had a shortage of this key good or needed more of this key service, we will use the DPA authorities and hope that the private sector can respond. However, just because the government has the authority to order the more production of a good does not mean, of course, the private sector can magically summon up that service. Therefore, government agencies must work more closely with industries and service providers to better understand their true capabilities ahead of a crisis. We recommend that you reauthorize and modernize the DPA's Title VII authorities so that government agencies can improve plans with private sector experts to anticipate problems, and so that government agencies can deploy private sector experts into government during a crisis. Third, since the end of the Cold War, oversight and coordination in the DPA inside the executive branch has atrophied. Congress has made numerous attempts to revitalize good governance inside the executive branch through past reauthorizations of the DPA, including with the creation of an interagency DPA committee, also known as the DPAC. Unfortunately, these reforms have not been successful as hoped. What makes this situation worse is that the private industry and supply chains are vastly more complicated and sophisticated than they were in 1950. In turn, this makes the government plans for using the DPA to manage extreme risk even more complex. To help address this problem, we recommend that Congress improve the transparency and governance of the DPA under Title VII. It will benefit the nation both before and during a crisis if the private sector and policymakers are more aware of how the government plans to use DPA authorities during a real catastrophe. Thank you again, committees, for your attention to this important DPA authority and for its use in safeguarding America. With that, I look forward to your questions and supporting future reauthorization efforts.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Next, we'll hear from Dr. John McGinn, Executive Director of the Baroni Center for Government Contracting at the George Mason University.
Great. Thank you, Chairman Scott, Ranking Member Warren, Senator Moreno, Senator McCormick, for the opportunity to speak with you today. I run the Center for Government Contracting at George Mason University, but prior to that, I was a career SES responsible for DPA authorities in DOD, Title III and Title VII, specifically CFIUS, which we'll talk about. But from my opening statement, I want to focus on how we can strengthen the DPA for the future. As you both outlined, the DPA gives the President broad authority to ensure timely availability of essential domestic industrial capabilities. As I described in my written testimony, there are 3 active titles, Title I, Title III, and Title VII, that have been used with great effect, as Senator Warren outlined, for decades. While the authority is strong overall, there are some opportunities for strengthening and revitalizing the authorities. First of all, I recommend that it is essential to keep DPA firmly focused on defense and national security issues, in particular threats from our critical competitor, China. Using DPA outside of direct national security or national emergency purposes threatens the viability of this unique tool of our industrial base. DPA Title I. Title I is focused on the distribution and allocations of goods and services. It has been used to prioritize the contracts of many key defense systems for decades, and it also was used to great effect during the COVID-19 crisis, rating over $3 billion in contracts for the production of ventilators and protective personnel equipment. While this works well, at the national level, the DPA is governed by old and overlapping executive orders spanning several administrations that need to be refreshed and simplified. The Trump administration should conduct a thorough review to better orient DPA policies and practices for today's challenges. DPA Title III. So Title III, as our colleagues have outlined, is a tremendous tool for building industrial capacity through grants, loans, purchases, and purchase commitments. 2 examples of recent impact include $1 billion, which was appropriated during COVID through the CARES Act for pandemic response, as well as other industrial-based needs. And then in 2023, over $500 million was appropriated for projects in areas such as specialty chemicals, hypersonics, microelectronics packaging, strategic and critical materials, minerals, and solid rocket motors. Title III, however, could be significantly strengthened by three ways. Number one, removing the non-delegable requirement that the President sign each DPA determination, which greatly reduces and slows the process through which DPA projects are developed and executed. Number two, enabling the use of purchase commitments to create a guaranteed demand signal over time for industrial capabilities such as critical minerals. These offtake agreements will, through purchase commitments, will do that. And then finally, third, raise the DPA fund ceiling, which is currently at $750 million, to enable the use of purchase commitments and other Title III investments. Title VII. Title VII has several components, including industrial-based assessments, voluntary agreements, and it governs the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, or CFIUS. Title VII can be strengthened by 3 areas, 2 of which have to do with sections of Title VII that have been scarcely used since the end of the Cold War. The first is Section 708, which permits the government to establish voluntary agreements between government and industry in specific sectors, such as critical minerals or the like. That would be, as we noted in a recent report that we published on Title VII, increasing the use of these voluntary agreements is a critical way to increase overall industrial capacity. Section 710 enables the establishment of a cadre of industry executives to be trained for government service in the event of a national emergency. This National Defense Executive Reserve has not been active since the end of the Cold War, and we need to develop a new model for how to use National Defense Executive Reserve in the future. Finally, the 2018 Foreign Investment Risk Review Modernization Act, or FIRMA, which Congress kindly passed and the President signed, modernized CFIUS to address concerns principally from China. But there's always room to improve this authority. There's several bills that have been introduced, including the Bipartisan PASS Act and the Bipartisan PROTECT Act, and I look forward to their consideration by Congress. In conclusion, the DPA is a critical presidential authority designed to specifically address the industrial issues we face today. It's been reauthorized 53 times, and in most recent cases has been extended for 5 or 6 years. It is vital that the Congress reauthorize DPA, and it's incredibly heartening to hear that you're all committed to do so. I respectfully recommend you work to complete a long-term reauthorization this year, if at all possible. Thank you very much for your time and and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Lastly, we have Dr. Rush Doshi, the CV Star Senior Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. Dr. Doshi, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Scott, Ranking Member Warren, distinguished members of the committee. Thank you very much for the opportunity to testify today on the Defense Production Act. My remarks will make 4 points. First, China is an ambitious and formidable competitor. Second, the United States needs the DPA to cope with the various military and non-military challenges that China poses. Third, China's system has far broader authorities than the DPA, putting us at a disadvantage. And fourth, smart reforms to the DPA can address concerns about overuse without narrowing its scope. I'll now discuss each of these. First, China has a grand strategy to displace U.S.-led order. It seeks to catch up and surpass the U.S. technologically, to make the world dependent on China's supply chains economically, and to acquire the capability to defeat U.S. forces militarily. It is now 130% of U.S. GDP by purchasing power, 2 times the U.S. share of global manufacturing, and 2 times U.S. power generation. Second, without DPA reauthorization, we simply cannot address China's military and non-military threats. Beijing is is undertaking the fastest military buildup in its history. It now boasts 200 times our shipbuilding capacity, 80% of global drone production, and global leadership in hypersonics. In 5 years, it will add 65 vessels to its navy, which will then be nearly 50% larger than ours. By contrast, in a conflict with China, we would expend our most critical munitions within about a week. We also face significant non-military challenges. One is a new era of cyber warfare. Beijing is planning cyber attacks on critical infrastructure across sectors like power, water, gas, telecom, and transportation, which would affect the lives of tens of millions of Americans. Another challenge is a new era of geoeconomic warfare. Beijing is leveraging its chokehold on rare earths and rare earth magnets today to throttle American manufacturing in the current trade war. It could do the same in antibiotics, where it has a 90% market concentration, denying Americans life-saving medicines. The DPA is critical to addressing these threats. DPA Title III can fund new production lines for cruise missiles and uncrewed systems, expand shipyard capacity, and reshore the batteries, motors, and rare earths China now makes. DPA Title VII can help us find PRC threat vectors in our networks and critical dependencies in our supply chains. And DPA Title I and Title III can help us reallocate goods or boost production after a debilitating cyber or supply chain attack. Failing to extend the DPA or narrowly reauthorizing it to focus exclusively on defense items, as some propose, would risk leaving us dangerously exposed. It deprives President Trump of a tool that he needs to win the current trade war or to reshore production. It undermines his executive order on critical minerals, which is grounded in DPA authorities. It makes it harder for us to deal with cyber attacks and supply chain shocks, and it makes a future Operation Warp Speed all but impossible. It also overlooks history. When Congress passed the DPA, it modeled it after the War Powers Acts of 1941 and 1942. Those acts recognized that defense and civilian economies blurred, and that economic security was critical to national security. Third, China's defense production authorities vastly exceed our own. The PRC system is comprised of its National Defense Mobilization Law, its Emergency Response Law, and various ad hoc administrative measures. It legally requires all PRC citizens, companies, universities, and state-owned enterprises to fully support defense mobilization. The PRC effectively has total power to redirect production, reassign personnel, and requisition property. The PRC also maintains a detailed registry of mobilization assets. Americans would rightly reject this system, which is far more coercive than our own. We should also recognize that China's system might move more quickly and comprehensively and effectively against us in a crisis or conflict, and we should therefore be wary of scaling back our system, which has served us for 70 years, prematurely. Fourth, we can reform DPA, I think, without narrowing its scope. First, I think instead of narrowing the DPA to military production only, Congress should consider updating the definition of national defense, as it has many times in years past, this time by providing relevant domains, scenarios, threats, or tiered justifications for invoking DPA. That could keep DPA flexible, keep it strategic, without making it a catch-all tool. Second, Congress should allow DPA Title III investments in allied nations that support the defense industrial base. China outscales the United States today. But the U.S. with its allies outscale China if we work together. Third, Congress should establish multi-year DPA title funds and authorize and appropriate funding for key national security priorities like missile production and rare earth processing, as we've already discussed. And fourth, Congress should appropriate funds and encourage agencies to reactivate the now dormant National Defense Executive Reserve, originally established under DPA Title VII, to ensure a pool of industrial experts available in a crisis. Since the 1950s, Congress has reauthorized or extended the DPA more than 50 times. In light of the current China challenge, it's critical to do so again. I thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Doshi. We'll first have our questions come from Senator Moreno. Will take my spot, and I'll take his later on.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you, Chairman, for doing this, for having this very important session. It's something that's long overdue. So start with you, Dr. McGinn. You talked about CFIUS, near and dear to my heart. As you know, CFIUS plays a critical role in reviewing inbound foreign investments, as you described. President Trump recognized a glaring loophole in the law, which currently does not cover greenfield investments, but rather only allows CFIUS to review investments of acquisitions of existing U.S. companies. I introduced a bipartisan bill called the PROTECT Act with my colleagues Alyssa Slotkin and Senator Tim Sheehy, which would close this loophole and ensure that all greenfield and brownfield transactions from foreign countries are concerned are reviewable by CFIUS. Do you believe that this would be helpful to better protect our national security from potentially harmful or threatening investments by foreign countries?
Thank you for the question, Senator Moreno. As you know, CFIUS is an incredibly powerful tool for our government to protect national security interests. And greenfield investments have long been kind of not part of CFIUS because CFIUS looks at individual business transactions. So, but it is totally the prerogative of the Senate to consider adding that as a potential thing that should be covered under CFIUS. And I look forward for the conversations that you're going to have in the deliberations on that, and in working with the agencies to see the practical kind of ramifications of that and how that would be doable.
Yeah, we'd love to have you take a look at the bill if you haven't already done it, and we'd love to get that across the finish line. It's a rare bipartisan bill, and hopefully we can get that done. It's common sense.
I'd love that.
Along those same lines, I understand that the DPA fund, which is held by Treasury but managed by the Department of Defense, used to be managed at an Air Force research laboratory housed at a place called the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. But over the last 2 years, the Pentagon moved the management of the DPA fund out of Ohio and centralized it in a new management structure called the Defense Priorities and Allocation System. However, heard concern that this new system does not adequately follow established contracting best practices. Dr. McGinn, could you talk about DPAS system's shortcoming and contrast them to the phenomenal, world-class, perfection management system in Dayton, Ohio? Not biased at all on that question, to be clear.
Thank you, Senator. Yeah, so the Air Force is currently the executive agent for the conduct of Defense Production Act Title III projects, and they've delegated further to Wright-Patterson Air Force Research Lab to do the contracting and execution of Title III projects. And so that is, but that is still the case that they're doing that. The DPA fund is managed by the Department of Defense. I was not aware that that is not managed by, as far as I know, by the Wright-Patterson itself, but by the Office of Secretary of Defense. So there hasn't been a movement of that degree. But the work I've worked with the personnel at Wright-Patterson when I was in government, and they are phenomenal, and they continue to do phenomenal work.
Yeah, they moved the functions out, which in reality is we should move moving functions in to centralize that. It makes sense to have all of that together. It makes, as you know, a lot of efficiencies. And I don't want to keep picking on you for questions, but we'll keep it going here. I'm particularly concerned that the powers that over the last administration, the DPA powers were bastardized in a sense and expanded beyond congressional intention by the Biden White House in areas like green energy, for example, which was clearly a political move, not a national security move. Why is it critically important for DPA to maintain its focus on national defense in a nonpartisan way, and what dangers could arise if it doesn't to fortify political positions rather than national security positions?
Great question, Senator. Yeah, I would say as we've seen very clearly in this hearing, DPA is a bipartisan supported authority, and it works best when it really focuses on those bipartisan kind of interest areas. And the real priority areas for DPA have been traditionally defense or true national emergency efforts. Now, if when DPA is used in other ways, such as what you're referring to, it sometimes can become politically kind of charged. And if the DPA becomes politically charged, that is always really bad. And some of the things that we live with today, for instance, the cap on the DPA fund of $750 million, that is a result of a previous reauthorization of the DPA where there was some projects were done that were not agreed with politically that then led to the reauthorization to put more strictures around DPA. So it is imperative to keep DPA focused on clear bipartisan focused efforts, and if priorities are in other areas, there are other means to do those kind of legislative efforts.
I yield, but Mr. Chairman, I think that's, and for the ranking member, I think that's really important as we discuss DPA, that it becomes completely apolitical, and it's about protecting our country and not getting into political priorities and using funds that way. So thank you.
Agreed. Ranking Member Warren, you are next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I disagree with the president's disastrous approach to worldwide tariffs. He's causing economic chaos and uncertainty that are hurting workers and working families and small businesses all around this country. If he continues his giant game of on-again, off-again tariffs, he's going to push our country into a recession. Tariff reform is badly needed. The mantra embraced for decades by many Democrats and Republicans alike that free trade with China would somehow work to our favor was flatly wrong. Those policies, combined with China's aggressive trade practices, have cost millions of Americans their jobs. They have also undercut our economic and national security. Beijing is increasingly using its significant leverage over critical supply chains to exert influence around the world while the United States stands by. Now, during the Biden administration, the PRC restricted the export of several critical minerals, gallium, germanium, graphite, antimony, right, in response to U.S. export controls. Now, during the Trump administration, the PRC has cut off access to several more critical minerals. Mr. Doshi, you worked on China policy at the National Security Council, and you have seen the importance of addressing China's leverage over critical supply chains. How important is the Defense Production Act to reshoring those critical chains and competing with China?
Well, thank you, Ranking Member Warren. It is essential. 30 years ago, when China joined the World Trade Organization, the United States was about 30% of global manufacturing value add. Today, we're 17%, and in 5 years, we might be 11%. That's not a great situation. As you mentioned in your opening, the Defense Production Act is critical to expanding American industrial capacity. If we want to reduce dependence on Chinese critical minerals, we need DPA. If we want to produce cruise missiles or ships, we need DPA. If we want to surge production after a supply chain attack, we need DPA as well. I think it's essential right now with China throttling American industry by going after rare earths and rare earth magnets in the trade war. I think President Trump needs DPA in order to be able to effectively negotiate with the PRC.
Yeah, I agree with you on this. I don't support the president's trade war in the way that he's conducting it, but I do think that the president needs tools like the DPA to be able to stand up to Xi Jinping. We also need a strong DPA to protect our medical supply chains and protect us from persistent shortages of many generic drugs. We can't defend our country if we can't provide life-saving drugs to our service members and to our citizens. According to the Defense Logistics Agency, 27% of the DoD's pharmaceutical supply chains are considered very high risk. That's 1 in every 4, because they are dependent on China or just an unknown source that nobody can figure out. Another 27%, that puts us well over half, is at high risk because they are dependent on non-Trade Agreement Act compliant countries. Mr. Brown, we have become dangerously dependent on foreign countries for pharmaceuticals, including active pharmaceutical ingredients. How should we be using the DPA to onshore drug manufacturing, to address shortages, and to build resilience?
It's a great question, Senator, and this has been an area of bipartisan consensus for many years. Recently, we've been using Title III funding from the DPA to help onshore some of this critical capacity. The current administration, through HHS, is having a hearing and a roundtable this June with industry to further address this issue. And you can imagine how much worse it could get if we were facing a mass casualty scenario here in the homeland. And to be clear, this is not just a foreign sourcing issue. We've had shortages of IV fluid following two different hurricanes. First with Hurricane Maria, and then again with Hurricane Helene, affecting manufacturing supply chains here in the United States. And so the DPA is important not just for onshoring, but enhancing the resilience of the supply chain here and abroad.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I appreciate your expanding out our vision of what we're talking about here. You know, this risk is not theoretical. It can cost American lives. I've introduced multiple bills to try to reinvigorate drug manufacturing here at home. It is clear that we need to use every tool at our disposal to create resilience in these supply chains. I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here and helping us understand the importance of using the DPA to protect national defense. Thank you.
Ms. Lyon, we use critical minerals across our supply chains, from defense munitions to commercial vehicles. The United States is home to many of these minerals. However, it's extremely challenging, time-consuming, and capital-intensive to open or expand mining facilities in the United States. And frankly, during your testimony, it seemed to me that the government creates a problem through permitting, and then we want to solve the problem through financing. Seems to me if we could eliminate the problem through permitting, we could not have to use the dollars for financing and then have other options available later. Talk to me about that.
Thank you, Senator, for the question. You're absolutely right that we have a problem of the left hand of government not always knowing what the right hand needs. And part of the value for us of the Defense Production Act, when we were 6 years into our permitting process, for which we were spending an average of $2 million a month to get through as a single asset company, we were stuck. And it was really hard to figure out, A, how to get our federal agencies to even talk to each other, to coordinate, to come to an agreed set of milestone expectations. But receiving the award sent the signal across the federal family that this had to be a priority, that we needed our agencies to work together to solve a problem. And I will say that working with the Defense Department was a refreshing experience of people who, when confronted with a problem, are mission-driven to find a solution. And that mentality absolutely helped us get to where we are today. And but for that coordination and accountability and transparency, I don't think we would be.
However, the 29 years, that's older than my staffers back here.
Yes, sir.
29 years to open a mine
Yeah.
is not frustrating, but infuriating. That alone should provide an opportunity for us not to talk just about talking across lines, but just solving that one simple problem that will be persistent for many years to come if we don't fix that one issue.
Yes, sir. That 29-year time frame is the second longest in the world, second only to Zambia. I have full faith in this country's ability to do great things, but this is not one of them right now. We have the right environmental standards, we have the right public transparency in our process, but we need to focus on how to make it a more coordinated process. We are returning to an abandoned mine site, a site that is in real trouble environmentally, and we've offered to clean it up. And we've got a critical mineral that's important for our strategic defense. And our time frame, it's not going to be 29 years, but it'll be at least 18.
It's crazy. Well, I have limited times. I keep myself to the same 5 minutes that I do require of everybody else. Dr. Doshi, you talked about the definition of national defense. Obviously, cybersecurity, technology, I think of Huawei as a real, actual existential threat, perhaps space, I think about satellites, pharmaceuticals, we've talked about that. If with limited time, talk to me about the need to define and perhaps expand the definition of national defense.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman Scott. We've had to redefine national defense in DPA many times, at least 4 times, in
Yes.
the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, and I think we have to do so again to consider some of the challenges that the PRC will pose to us. Supply chain attacks can occur in areas outside pharma, outside critical minerals. Cyber attacks can have implications for the wider country beyond simply just the loss of a piece of critical infrastructure. I think expanding the definition could be done in multiple ways, sir. One way is to list out scenarios that we want to plan against. Another is to list domains, as we have in the past, like space, that we want to make sure we're defending in. And another would be to offer tiered justifications. If this, then DPA can be activated, which should allow us to address some of the concerns Senator Moreno raised about the excessive use of DPA, hopefully depoliticize it. And I guess my answer, sir, would be definitions can help depoliticize the term.
Thank you. I'll return my 15 seconds, and Senator Kim, you are next.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Brown, I wanted to start with you just to talk through and build off of some of what was talked about. The Strategic Active Pharmaceutical Ingredient Reserve, it was created as a pharmaceutical equivalent in many ways to the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to reduce supply disruptions of key pharmaceutical ingredients. However, instead of financing it to maintain nearly 2 years' worth of supply and incentivizing private industry to incorporate it into a means to wean off of reliance on overseas supply, it's sitting right now in the single digits in capacity. So I guess, Mr. Brown, I just want to ask you, are there ways that we can use the DPA to more effectively leverage this reserve to reduce supply chain disruptions and drug shortages in the short term?
Yeah, Senator, I think this is an important point of how we can modernize and even look at what we used to use the DPA for, which is for stockpiling and reserves. As you mentioned, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve was also authorized under the DPA. And so as Congress looks ahead to a possible reauthorization and modernization of the Act, I do think this is one of those subjects that could be relooked at with an eye towards how we handled the Cold War with future 21st century threats in mind. I will also add that, as has been mentioned by my colleague, there is some discussion around the cap that is on the DPA Title III fund. This is, to me, largely an appropriations and budgeting issue, and so working closely with the appropriators on this issue is an important initiative.
Thank you. Dr. Doshi, I wanted to just talk about how critical biotech is, for instance, not only for innovation competitiveness, but also for our defense-related products. DoD launched the Distributed Bioindustrial Manufacturing Program last year, which supports private industry and develops commercial-scale facilities that fortify defense supply chains. This targets high-risk components of the military supply chain that could be alternatively produced through biomanufacturing, such as rocket propellant, jet fuel, et cetera. Without direction from DoD, the private sector will not build commercial-scale biomanufacturing infrastructure for defense-related products. So I find this to be an important effort. I guess I just wanted to ask you on this front, can you speak to why DPA funding for this is important and whether the administration and Congress are doing what's necessary to ensure this continues?
Well, thank you, Senator Kim. I'd start by saying that DPA Title III funding has been used, as was referenced earlier in the hearing, to expand industries critical to American national security, including nascent developed. We used DPA Title III in the past to stand up some of our semiconductor capacity and invest in new innovative industries. I think the same is true for biotechnology. So I think you could imagine using DPA Title III to build more capacity in this space. The second point I'd make is that many of the inputs in the biotech sector, whether that's animal models or reagents or enzymes or expensive equipment, a lot of that is imported from China today. And so if there were an escalation in the trade war, you might need DPA Title III, for example, or Title I in some cases, to be able to ensure that we could expand production of those critical inputs or prioritize contracts for government and national security purposes under Title I. So there's a lot of ways in which I think DPA is critical to supporting this sector, which is now a sector at the heart of competition.
Yeah, thank you. And you know, we talked earlier about the challenges when it comes to critical minerals, especially vis-a-vis the PRC. And you know, part of the reason that the PRC commands such a large share of the critical minerals market is that they treat the supply like a faucet. You know, they turn it on, they flood the market with cheap commodities. Once the competitors run out of the market, they can turn the faucet down. Prices stabilize. You know, it's basically utilizing these kind of non-market policies to be able to mobilize. And you know, it's something that shows that building new mines is not enough. We need to ensure that they can continue to operate even when the PRC floods the market. So, Mr. Doshi, can you just give us a little bit of a sense of how we should be using the DPA to counter these particular non-market policies to ensure our investment at home do not go to waste?
Well, Senator Kim, I think this is a critical point, and we heard a little bit about this in the context of antimony already, which is a very good case study of the PRC restricting a critical mineral and DPA stepping in to ensure adequate capacity. But here's the broader point. Every time we get close to having our own production, our own refining, our own stockpile of these kinds of critical minerals, the PRC drops the price. And that's where DPA is going to be needed to prevent market manipulation.
Ms. Lyon, do you agree with that?
Absolutely, Senator.
Yeah, I just think that that's something hopefully, again, we can hone in on and just kind of understand and see the different ways it can be used. And with that, I'll yield back.
Thank you, Senator Kim. Before we hear from Senator Ricketts, I wanted to take this opportunity to say to Rachel Candle, whose last hearing is today, thank you for your service to the Banking Committee, and we will certainly miss you and look forward to your success with the Speaker of the House. I'm not sure why you want to go to the other side of the Capitol, but stranger things have happened, I guess. But you've been amazing, and we really appreciate who you are, what you represent, and your intellectual curiosity and depth has been a powerful tool for all of us to serve the American people, and you will be missed. Senator Ricketts.
Well, thank you, Chairman Scott, for holding this hearing. And thank you to all of our witnesses here today to take the time to be able to talk to us about the important issues here with the Defense Production Act. Communist China poses the single greatest threat to our country outside in the international forum. It's a threat to our nation economically, militarily, and we remain too reliant right now on Communist China for essential inputs. We've seen what happens when the CCP decides to weaponize its control over key supply chains, cutting off exports, manipulating markets, and using state-owned enterprises to undercut American producers. This is a vulnerability that we cannot afford. And Rush, I know you and I have had this conversation many times. I just spoke with Secretary Rubio yesterday in a hearing about what Communist China could do as far as an energy blockade of Taiwan. And we were also then discussing mineral supply chains around the world. If we're serious about winning in this era of strategic competition, then we need to use every tool available to rebuild our domestic capabilities and reduce our reliance on Communist China. So, Ms. Lyon, how much of your company's project's timeline were consumed with federal permitting process, and how does that affect your ability to scale quickly in response to national security needs?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. Great question. Overall, what will be our 18-year time frame from identifying these minerals to getting them out of the ground, should everything stay on track, over about 9 years was absorbed by the permitting process, which represents about a $400 million investment in total by the company.
So about 9 years.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So, Mr. Doshi, so if there were to be a conflict with China over Taiwan, how long do you think that would last? I mean, just ballpark, I know it's a very hypothetical question, but is it going to last 9 years long?
Well, Senator, we need to move faster than 9 years.
Yeah, that would be what my take on it would be too. Ms. Lyon, do you believe current permitting timelines are compatible with the urgency of reducing our reliance on communist China for critical minerals like cobalt or antimony?
No, sir.
And just to put it in perspective as well, your time frame, when I was governor of Nebraska, we were trying to raise a levee around Offutt Air Force Base and STRATCOM. You may know that STRATCOM controls all our nuclear weapons. Offutt Air Force Base is where it's located. The Army Corps took 6 years to get a permit to raise that levee 2 feet. I'm guessing that was somewhat less complicated than what you were asking for in your permit. Ms. Lyon, as we look to reauthorize the Defense Production Act, what improvements would you recommend making to streamline the permitting and environmental review timelines for DPA to support project planning?
Senator, thank you for the question. I think one of the most important things that we can do is make sure that the left hand of government knows what the right needs. Having the Department of Defense being able to coordinate and work with the permitting agencies to flag projects that are critical for prioritization is absolutely critical. The recent addition of projects to the Permitting Council, I think, will absolutely benefit the long-term delivery of critical minerals to this country, to provide transparency and accountability into the process to make sure that things are prioritized and stay on track.
Okay, great. Dr. McGinn, can you weigh in on that too, please?
I think, yes, permitting is a major challenge as you outlined and Ms. Lyon did. And I think that would be a critical a point of reform that you could get through. You don't need to use the DPA reauthorization to do that, but it is really hindering our ability to build and rebuild critical mineral kind of capacity in the United States.
Great, thanks. Well, the DPA is a powerful tool, but like any tool, it can be misused or exploited if it's not properly guarded. It makes little sense for the U.S. to pour federal taxpayer dollars into shoring up our supply chains, only to have those funds ultimately benefit our adversaries. Dr. McGinn, how does the DPA currently adequately prevent companies with ownership ties to foreign adversaries from receiving funding or contracts under the Act?
Under the Act, your companies that are U.S.-based companies or companies that are based in Canada, or the U.K. or Australia are permitted to compete for Title III projects. So they have to, and then under the contracting, the companies are have to be domiciled in one of those areas.
Okay, well, since the chairman's not here, I'm going to go ahead. I think I'm the new chairman, or are you the chairman now, Rounds? You're next. Okay, great. So I'm going to go ahead and take a couple extra minutes here then. So, Dr. McGinn, how rigorous is the foreign entity vetting process in the DPA award pipeline compared to the traditional DoD procurement procedures under the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement?
It is under the same authority.
So it's all pretty relative.
Yeah,
it's all.
That's correct.
It's
It's distinct from like a CFIUS, which is for a review of a transaction when they specifically look at ownership kind of, but all the standard the DFARS rules that you cite would go for Title III projects.
All right, so you think it's sufficient as it is. Is that accurate?
I haven't seen any evidence to point me that it's not.
Mr. Brown, can you weigh in on that too, as far as making sure our foreign adversaries don't benefit from our taxpayer dollars? Do we have sufficient safeguards here?
Yeah, and so to Ms. Lyon's point earlier to your questioning about the right hand and the left hand, the Congress authorized an entity called the Defense Production Act Committee specifically so that the left hand and the right hand could negotiate and discuss about these issues. And that's one of the things that has not taken off like it should have under the executive branch and needs the oomph of Congress in this reauthorization effort to really make sure we have these centralized coordination and discussions going on throughout the interagency about the necessity and use of DPA.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Mr. Rounds. Oh, well, I was going to say, Ranking Member, have you already asked your questions?
Okay.
Okay, great.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to visit with all of you today. It is appreciated that you come in and to do this with us. We did a piece of legislation that we proposed called the PASS Act. And my question will begin with Dr. McGinn. As you know, there have been numerous reports of suspicious activity by U.S. adversaries in regards to U.S. agricultural land purchases. I appreciate the work CFIUS has done over the last year to expand security review authority over foreign purchases of real estate near American military bases. I believe the recent action to add a net total of 56 facilities across 30 states to the CFIUS review list is an important first step. But I think we're going to probably have to go farther than that. I think it's critical that Congress pass legislation, the PASS Act, that I've introduced with Senator Cortez Masto and many others to curtail agricultural land purchases by our stated foreign adversaries near military bases. So for Dr. McGinn, I want to thank you for your testimony and for your support of this legislation in your testimony. How significant of a national security threat is China?
China is our principal national security threat facing us today.
Today, there are numerous examples where they have tried to gather data or they have looked at setting up facilities near sensitive sites within the United States.
That's correct, Senator. I used to oversee CFIUS when I was in the Department of Defense several years ago, and there was a big turn in the late mid to late 2010s when CFIUS transactions were principally from European-based countries or Japanese-based countries or like, to becoming China started using state-owned enterprises or private companies to conduct do that, conduct transactions. And so what that led to is Congress acted and established FIRMA, passed the law that modernized CFIUS specifically to address these kind of threats. And I will say, I can't talk about specific transactions, but those kind of proximity transactions were really, really closely monitored by the committee, and they continue to be so. So I would encourage you to work with talk to the committee about the gaps that they see either in the Department of Defense or Treasury, and how your legislation could potentially help the CFIUS authority. But the more that we can strengthen and protect our national defense assets geographically in the United States, the better.
Great, thank you. I appreciate the support on that legislation. Ms. Lyon, South Dakota and states like mine have mineral resources that could contribute to our national defense and reduce reliance on adversaries like China. Given the permitting challenges and price manipulation you've described, what steps, legislative or administrative, would help make DPA support more effective for companies trying to establish domestic processing capacity?
Thank you for the question, Senator. Processing is absolutely the next link in the supply chain that we must be concerned about. It doesn't make sense to take all of this effort to get minerals out of the ground to have to send them to China for processing. Antimony is a really interesting case where China controls about 50% globally. They control 80 to 88% once you include secondary processing. So we've got to figure out how to bring not only the mineral production home, but the processing as well. And it needs to happen in parallel, because we've got a bit of a chicken and egg problem where it's difficult for a new processing facility to be built and put online if it doesn't know it has the minerals coming in the door. And at the same time, once the minerals are ready, you can't wait 3 years for the permitting and development of a processing facility. So DPA can absolutely use its authorities to help these things occur in parallel with one another, and that requires investment.
I think that's one of the most important reasons why we need to move forward with the reauthorization on DPA. Thank you. And with that, on behalf of the chairman, I will recognize Senator Reed.
Thank you very much, Senator Rounds. Thank you all for your testimony. Dr. McGinn, the DPA was created to maintain our military and economic strength. In fact, President Trump used it multiple times during the COVID crisis to secure ventilators, masks, and so many other things. So would you agree that the DPA is does protect our economic strength, and that's sort of parallel with our national security strength, too?
Senator, great to see you again,
Yes,
and
sir.
thank you very much for your question. The DPA, is used for national defense and national emergency situations. So COVID definitely kind of qualified in that situation. So it was very effective and used in that kind of way. And by those actions, it does kind of help on economic security. But part of the problems overall with DPA, or not a problem, but the reinvestment to bring back capacity, whether that be defense focused or commercial focused, because many of these areas like antimony, they have many more commercial uses than defense. But the key is how do we kind of use DPA to help restart the market, but then how does that sustain? Because we can't keep investing taxpayer dollars to prop up industry. So it's, beyond the initial investment in, whatever is made, how do we make these economically viable capabilities in the United States?
Thank you very much, and thank you for your service, Dr. McGinn. Dr. Doshi, China is always on everyone's mind at the moment, and can you explain how China in particular or other adversaries try to weaken our national security through non-military means, and how does DPA act as a counter to that?
Well, thank you very much for the question, Senator Reed. Let me just offer maybe two broad categories. There are many more we could go into, but in the interest of time, one is, of course, manipulation of markets. And the reality is that our free market system is sometimes vulnerable when adversaries pour tons of money in to manipulate prices. All of a sudden, our businesses simply can't compete. They can stay solvent longer than we can because we're disciplined by the market. That's where DPA comes in. DPA Title III can create capacity. DPA Title VII can create voluntary agreements. Title III can also allow us, as Mr. McGann mentioned earlier, to basically do purchase commitments or offtake for some of these companies. It allows us to solve some of the market problems that adversaries are able to engineer for us, and I think that's why it's essential. Very briefly, a second category we should think a lot more about is cyber attacks on our critical infrastructure. And there, again, that will trigger effectively a disaster. That kind of disaster will require DPA Title I, III, and VII authorities to solve.
No, I think you're exactly right. Most people assume that the first stage of any future conflict will be cyber attacks, trying to disguise, if they can disguise them, but there'll be cyber attacks requiring us to respond. For the whole panel, beginning with Ms. Lyon, what are the risks we face if we don't authorize the DPA and extend its life?
Thank you for the question. In our case, our military wouldn't have access to the key component that allows 300 types of munitions to fire. Our warfighter would be in a situation where they don't know if their base equipment will work. We are completely reliant on our adversary for that material, but for the DPA.
Thank you. Mr. Brown, please.
Sir, as I said in my testimony, I genuinely cannot think of any really bad dark day in American history that doesn't rely on the DPA to respond to. There isn't a scenario that I can genuinely imagine that keeps you up as night as the Armed Services Ranking Member about which the DPA wouldn't be used. And so without reauthorizing this, or at least replacing it with some other similar set of authorities, our catastrophic response plans are gutted.
Thank you. Dr. McGinn, please.
I concur 100% with my colleague, Senator. The imperative to reauthorize DPA is very, very strong, because we will not be able to effectively respond to, like, you saw the role it had during the COVID response. We see the role it's having in rebuilding some capacity. But if we don't have that tool, it makes it much, much more difficult.
Thank you. And Doctor, please.
Thank you, Senator. Well, we're a long way from the 1950s. The need for DPA is greater today as our industrial capacity has shrunk. The threats we face are greater. We can't reshore. We can't deal with natural disasters. We can't deal with cyber attacks without DPA.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I think an excellent way to close out this hearing. On behalf of the chairman, I would like to thank our witnesses for being here today. Some of you have traveled across the country to get here. You took time from your busy schedules to come and share your testimony with us. We appreciate your perspective on the Defense Production Act, so thank you for your time. For senators who wish to submit questions for the hearing record, those questions are due 1 week from today, Thursday, June 5th. To our witnesses, you will have 45 days from that day to submit your responses to questions for the record. And with that, thank you to the committee, and the committee is adjourned.